Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar before the AI Hype, Data Foundations and Data Management in Pharma and Biotech. My name is Elżbieta Wadygóra. I'm from Holisticon Connect, the host of today's event. With us is also Ilona Chodorowska from British Polish Chamber of Commerce, our partner and co-organizer of this event. Ilona, over to you for a few words of welcome.
Just wanted to say hello. Thank you for joining us. As Elżbieta already said, I'm managing director for the western part of the British Polish Chamber of Commerce. What we generally do is facilitate trade, investment, and business between Poland and the UK. And today we have a pleasure, together with Holisticon Connect, to invite you to a specialist webinar on databases and artificial intelligence. And I wish you a good and fruitful time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilona. And now let's move on to our speakers. Sebastian Andruszczak, Chief Growth Officer at Holisticon Connect, me Hartstink, Director of Global Alliances and Sales at UK, Nexer Data Management, and Damien Stevenos from Stibo Systems, Manufacturing Practice Lead. And with that, I hand over to Sebastian to begin.
Thank you very much. It's great to see you guys, at least to know that you are there. The goal for this webinar is to chat a little about the generative AI, pharmaceutical industry and the data and how it is all connected with each other. If it comes to me, like I work at Holisticon Connect, and just for your information, we have a kind of extensive experience in drug discovery for biotech and pharma companies. And now we started extending it even more to cover other areas than drug discovery only. So just to give you some kind of context, and I will use my notes, I haven't really memorized all this stuff, but it will show the line of thinking that I had while planning this conversation. So the context is as follows. Pharmaceutical industry is investing 3 and 8 billion globally in generative AI tools. Predictions are saying that those investments will rise from 2025 to 2030, and the increase will be like 600%. And at the same time, 75% of pharmaceutical companies have made generative AI as a strategic priority. I could give you sources for all of this, but this is just to give some kind of frame. Generative AI is important. The purposes of implementing such solutions are various, like starting with drug discovery and molecular design through drug repurposing up to just the kind of process and business optimization. And then another part of the story is about generative AI and how it fails. So recently I was reviewing some materials from Boston Consulting Group, and long story short, 60% of generative AI pilots fail to scale. And data readiness is the number one technical barrier. Then 72% of pharma executives is saying that data infrastructure is not ready for generative AI at scale. This is UI. And then Deloitte stresses that data governance and research are critical for generative AI success in regulated industries like pharma. So my conclusion is that we are circling around the same topics for decades. And the topics are actually around the data, its quality, its governance and stuff. And I would like to use this opportunity of having Damien here and listen to his perspective about it.
Yeah, no, so I completely agree with this, Sebastian. And it's actually a little ironic if you think about it, because when we're talking about generative AI and machine learning as revolutionary technologies, and yet we're still looking at the biggest barrier that remains is something that's been with us for decades, and that's the data. From my perspective, it's less a technology problem and it's more of a cultural one. So data exists, pharma companies have oceans and oceans of it, but it isn't maintained, governed, or used in the right way. So over the years, we've built incredibly sophisticated systems for research, trials, and manufacturing. But each of those systems tend to manage data in its own way. And that leads to what I call a false confidence. So we've got teams assume they have the data because it sits in databases somewhere. But in reality, it's incomplete or duplicated, out of sync, all three of these things sometimes with other systems. So when that data is fed into an AI model, the model doesn't know it's working with contradictions. It just reflects them as outputs. Therefore, as a result, amplifying the poor results in poor data. And I think culturally that's a real challenge. We still treat data as a byproduct of the process rather than assets that fuels everything else. In many organizations, ownership of data isn't clearly defined. Everyone uses it, but no one is truly accountable for its quality. So we look at the technology to fix this, the platforms, the integration tools, and the governance framework. Now, they already exist, but what's actually missing is the discipline to maintain the data with the same care that we apply to things like compliance, safety, and manufacturing quality. And that's why we see AI projects failing to scale. The data foundation just simply isn't being nurtured in the same level or attention as the algorithms built on top of it. And that is really where the conversation has to shift over the last year or two. It's not about whether AI can work, but about what has to be true in data before it can. Now, I know you, Sebastian, you've been talking with a lot of pharmaceutical leaders recently about this exact challenge and how they're approaching it through validation and governance. I'd be keen to understand what you've been hearing.
Yeah. I completely agree with your observations. So again, to give some kind of frame, when this generative AI hype has started, we as an organization wanted to contribute to these changes that are happening globally. However, we didn't want it to be one of those companies that are saying, yeah, we can connect your CRM or SharePoint to LLM and you will have generative AI-based solution. We wanted to really address the real need. So yeah, this is true. During last month, I met with more than 20 industry leaders responsible for either AI, machine learning, data, generative AI, innovation from the pharmaceutical industry. And I have grouped the challenges that I have learned about into 4 categories. So the first is definitely accuracy. The solutions that have been implemented are just not accurate. They are not giving the right information on the output. So yeah, the reasons are either fragmented data silos or legacy infrastructure, various reasons, but this is the one group of the issues. Then consistency. If you implement generative AI-based solutions, there are some taking into account that it could be described looking from some perspective as a black box. There are some issues with explainability of the outcome. So then people need to be involved in order to validate it. And on the one hand, this is the great human in the loop. It's so great and so cool. I think, yeah, the general approach is right. However, from the design perspective, people involvement into validating the data of technological solutions should be rather reduced than extended. Then another group of issues was related to language specificity. If you are implementing a generative AI-based tool for a 50 people team, no problem. In general, no problem at all. But if you are 100,000 people and you have branches in 67 different countries, then apparently small differences in language typical semantics are resulting in various outputs and various understanding of the outcome. And I'm so glad that there are some people, and like more than one, that are actually seeing it, because I think it's really major kind of observation. And then the last group of challenges was related to a lack of predictive and prescriptive capabilities out of the box. Leaders would like to do something more than just discuss stuff with data sets. They would like to be able to utilize results of machine learning algorithms that are working on those data sets. So those are four challenges that we have found during those conversations.
Okay, that sounds really fascinating, Sebastian. And it's really clear that this has started to resonate with the industry. It would be great to unpack this just a bit more. Is there any way you could walk us through what data validation AI agents actually looks like in practice?
Yeah, it's actually a great question. I was waiting for it the whole morning. Thank you very much, David. Long story short, our concept is to ensure that projects that our clients are leading around the generative AI-based solution won't fail. And in order to make it happen, we have introduced data validation AI agent, and it is actually based on 4 independent components. So depending on where the client is with his solution, how deeply it is developed and so on, we could propose all of just some of those, but ultimately it will impact all of those areas that I have mentioned a few moments ago. So the first component is a data governance framework and master data management. And it obviously addresses accuracy and consistency challenge. And it is tricky, to be fair, because on the one hand, we know that we could provide significant value. But on the other hand, sometimes we hear from clients that like, no, we have a team of 20 people, 30 people, they are working on it already. And then I'm like, okay, but are you satisfied? And apparently they are not really very satisfied. So I imagine that a really great added value that we could offer here is to work as an external advisor and solution provider, because this way we could omit those typical issues such as conflict of interest between various stakeholders, internal politics, and so on. It could, yeah, I think it makes like lots of sense, and no one paid to pay me for it. But at this moment, I just would like to use the opportunity to tell you that Novo Nordisk has done great work if it comes to data governance. Sometimes ago, a few conferences ago, I was speaking with a guy that has rolled out a data governance framework globally. They were testing it locally. Ultimately, it has been rolled out for the whole world. And when I chat with him about the level of details that have been taken into account, it was unexceptional. Unfortunately, he is not here, but I will share this recording with him afterwards. Then the second component is data architecture and data engineering. Long story short, to make sure that each department, stakeholder, team person has the right and very well curated data set that is needed for its own purpose. I should also include just some kind of technological solutions. It's not really for people only, but also for ML models, for example. So if you want to run ML model, you are just not feeding it with everything you have. You need to prepare those data. Then we have actual machine learning models development, so enabling those predictive and prescriptive capabilities. And then depending on if client has its own generative AI-based solution or not, we can either develop generative AI-based solution and the data validation AI agent, or just the data validation AI agent. Now, the one important distinction that I would like to mention here, if it comes to the data validation AI agent, why not just a data validation and a kind of tool? Because actually the solution is architectured in a way that one agent is validating another agent. So when I mentioned before that it shouldn't be conceptualized by design, that people must manually validate outcomes from generative AI, in this tool, in this solution, we are actually implementing double-step verification where 2 steps are done by a data validation AI agent. It could be also checked up manually, no problem with this, but it takes like lots of human work around from this boring stuff. So to be fair, looking on outcomes and clicking red or green, it's not really something that the most people would like to do. So yeah, this is in a few words.
I really like the framing of that, the data validation AI agent, Sebastian. To me, it shows fairly clearly that before you even get to the fun, predictive, and generative layers of AI, you really must begin with the foundation, which then, as you're framing it, and I completely agree, is about governance and MDM for that. And without that, it's trying to build a house on a foundation of sand, really. It might look good in the beginning, but it will have cracks and it won't work over time.
Yeah. I completely agree. And then you mentioned some things about the general concept, but taking into account that you, Damian, guys, what is your perspective of the importance of data governance framework and master data management? If you could share a few thoughts on a little more specific level, how clients are really benefiting of it.
No, absolutely. And this is a great question, and probably from my neck of the one I've been waiting for all morning to answer. Great that you turned that back to me, and I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a loaded question. So when we talk, let me step back just a tiny bit here. When we talk about generative AI or predictive modeling in pharma, the people usually often imagine this as a layer of intelligence that just plugs in on top of existing systems. But in reality, what makes or breaks success isn't the sophistication of the model. It's the integrity of the data ecosystem that lies underneath it. And this is where we talk about data governance and master data management. And they're like connective tissue that brings all the data together in a way AI can actually use it. So if you think of them as the difference between data being simply stored away somewhere and then data being understood and trusted and reusable. So in life science, the stakes are particularly high because the data itself is regulated to a greater degree than most other industries. So formulations, device specifications, supply qualifications, trial results, compliance documents, and so on. So if any of those elements are inconsistent, the risk doesn't just show up on an analytics dashboard. It actually shows up in delayed approvals, failed audits, and compliance findings. So now, the question is, why are governance and MDM so central? It's because it answers three fundamental questions that every regulator, and quite frankly, every executive wants to know. And that's, where did the data come from? Who validated it? And can we prove it hasn't been changed since? So without clear answers to those questions, people can't trust AI, no matter how advanced the model is. And we've seen this play out repeatedly. Now, I bought a couple of customer scenarios. Yeah, scenarios with me. So if I'm thinking of one global pharmaceutical organization that invested millions in digitalizing its regulatory submission process. And they have brilliant data scientists, the cutting edge models and automation everywhere. But when they tried to file simultaneously across regions, the submissions started failing because the product data used in Europe didn't match perfectly the reference data in North America. So even minor inconsistencies of like formula ID being off by 1 digit or a packing record being out of date triggered review delays. They were essentially re-auditing their own data at every submission. So what solved it wasn't solely on AI. It was introducing a governed MDM layer. They defined a single version of the truth for regulatory attributes, substances, excipients, packaging, and label variants, and applied stewardship rules to keep that data aligned across systems and processes. So within 6 months, submissions turned around, time dropped dramatically. And for the first time, they could actually reuse data confidently instead of rebuilding it in each market. And that's actually the power of getting the basics right here.
That's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, those are results that really stand out. And something, it's not something that executives turn their head away from. And I've got more examples as well, strangely enough. So we're looking at a major medtech manufacturer, and they were undertaking an ERP migration as part of a wider S4 HANA transformation. Now, we know these things are costly, expensive, and there's friction everywhere and people putting out their hair. So initially, the migration was stalling because the material and component records were fragmented across the legacy systems. And some of them were going back, the systems were going back 20 years plus. We're talking about blue screens here. And if anyone can remember what a blue screen looks like. But yeah, so every attempt to load that data into a new environment produced thousands of validation errors. When we help them apply proper governance, centralizing and duplicating those records through master data framework, we actually improved this by almost 100%. So it's like 99.99%. And the company ended up cutting migration costs by roughly a quarter. And perhaps more importantly, they laid the groundwork for predictive maintenance models using the same clear data set. And none of those AI initiatives would have been possible before. So this is about staging and being ready for AI. And we've also seen what happens when organizations don't have that foundation. we worked with a biotech company who wanted to apply AI to optimize clinical trial site selection and looking for the best locations, investigators, and patent tools. Now, if I remember rightly, on paper, it was a fantastic use case, sorry. But they quickly realized the underlying investigator and site data was inconsistent. Things like duplicates, missing certifications, and outdated contact details. And the algorithm couldn't distinguish between valid and invalid entries. So the insights were meaningless. They had to actually pause the AI project and first build a proper partner data domain under governance before continuing. But great thing is, once it's just in place, the AI delivered accurate recommendations, saving months in trial setups. So again, big results for them. And if I leverage one of our customers, I think it's quite interesting. It's Bristol Myers Squibb. And their journey is a perfect example of how strong data foundations created measurable value. And they built a centralized master data layer for supplier and product information, governing how suppliers were onboarded, qualified, and linked to materials. That actually reduced supplier qualification cycles by around about 40% from what I remember. And more importantly, it gave them the ability to apply AI for supplier risk analytics with full traceability. Now, when we say analytics risk, when we talk about supplier risk and full traceability, that is the bedrock of compliance and meeting market expectations within life science and pharma. So what we're saying here is, in other words, governance would turn compliance data into an actual strategic asset rather than it being a burden or a daily drill, something that had to be done because it had to be done. It's actually providing them benefit. We've got another customer as well, Coloplast, where UDI compliance was their big driver, and they needed absolute consistency across regional device records. And the governance gave them that alignment, but it also unlocked new possibilities. Once all device data was standardized, they could actually use AI to analyze production performance and anticipate supply bottlenecks. And again, we're seeing AI succeed because the foundation was there. So these examples share a pattern. So each company with an ambition for AI, but the real breakthrough came when they shifted focus from building smarter algorithms to actually building smarter data, the foundation we're talking about. So from a technology standpoint, governance and MDM create a structure that lets data flow seamlessly across research and development, regulatory, quality, and supply chain functions. But culturally, they establish accountability. So someone owns each domain. Data becomes an asset with life cycle and not a byproduct of a process. And that cultural change is what makes AI sustainable. Otherwise, even if you clean the data once, you find that entropy then takes over again, and you're back to where you started within a year.
Yeah.
So when you get this right, I think it's important to understand that when we do get this right, the benefits compound. So instead of spending 80% of the project time on cleansing and reconsolidation, teams can actually spend that time on innovation. AI models learn faster because inputs are stable. Regulatory reporting becomes a byproduct of everyday operation instead of a fire drill, which we see so often in this industry at the end of every quarter. And because lineage is built in, every AI-driven insight can actually be explainable to an auditor or a regulator in a matter of seconds, which is what we're looking as compliance and practices move forward. That's exactly what they're looking for. So when clients ask about data governance and MDM, why is it so critical? I simply tell them this: they're not the exciting part of AI, but they are the part that makes it trustworthy, repeatable, and scalable. And without them, you have projects, but with them, you have a platform that continuously innovates.
So Damien, just to really put the nail in the coffin here, we're talking a lot about that across the pharma industry, but frankly, in general, we're seeing huge investments into AI. But really the scalability part of the AI, what is it that hinders this scaling?
Yeah, again, another great question. It is one that most leadership teams are quietly asking themselves right now. And if they're not, they should be. And the truth is, these initiatives don't fail because AI technology isn't good enough. And I think I've said this in a different way, but it fails because the data underneath it isn't ready. Pharma data landscapes are incredibly complex. They spread across research and development, manufacturing, regulatory, and supply chain systems, and often with no single source of the truth. So when data is fragmented and inconsistent or lacks lineage, AI simply amplifies those problems instead of generating insight. And this creates noise, bias, and results that just simply can't be trusted. it's not that AI isn't working, it's that the data feeding it isn't fit for purpose. If the data isn't accurate, traceable, or aligned across the organization, even the best AI models will struggle to deliver measurable or compliant outcomes.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what we see in pharma and medtech generally is that data without governance really becomes a liability because you put trust in something that turns out that you actually couldn't trust. And then it slows down compliance. It creates all of these risks, meaning that all of the AI initiatives that you're pouring all of this money into is actually fragile. And just looking at the governance perspective here, governance isn't a one-time fix in my book. And I think you said it earlier as well, both Sebastian and Damien, is a cultural thing. It's something that's an iterative process that needs to go, or it's a muscle that you need to train, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Companies right now in pharma, in every function, across research and development, regulatory, clinical, manufacturing, supply chain, and more, depends on precise, consistent data. And yet most of the data is still sitting in silos. So you'll often find 5 or 6 versions of the same product record, conflicting trial results across systems, or even supplier data that doesn't match between quality and procurement. And without that governance and master data, each team is working from a different source of truth. And that's really inefficient. This is the bedrock of what creates our compliance risks. So regulators expect every record from formulation to device ID to be traceable and explainable. If those connections aren't in place, then audit slows down, submissions are delayed, and analytics start to lose credibility. So good governance here is an MDM solved this by creating alignment. They connect the products, the trial, the regulatory, the supply data into governed domains where everyone, including an AI model, is working from the same trusted foundation. When we actually talk about this, May, when we talk about data governance and MDM, it sounds a bit abstract. And in practice, what do you think this looks like from like when a company implements this?
So in my book, MDM in practice means what you said before, creating that single source of truth, but not just generally, but from the critical data in your business. And that's different from business to business. It could be your product specifications, your clinical trial attributes, supply information, general trial data, or even, I guess, regulatory data, so forth. It can be many things, but creating that single source of truth for that. So instead of having 10 different versions of the same attribute spread across your different systems, R&D, regulatory, or your supply chain systems for that matter, you have that one governed version that everyone relies on. Even when it is not something you can rely on, then you correct it there in the MDM system to make sure that it's corrected once and then it's correct everywhere. So really that's where you place your trust. And I think you quantified it very well, Damien, earlier with Bristol Myers, right? They implemented an MDM system, then they reduced their supplier qualification by 40%. You also mentioned Coloplast, which is one of our clients, where UDI compliance was really a big driver for them, and helping them implement a system so that device and regulatory data could be harmonized and traceable really helped them be compliant and build that foundation that they were looking for. To answer your question shortly, in practice, MDM and governance really means mastering your data, creating a foundation that connects your systems, relevant systems. It aligns also definitions of what is data, what does it actually mean, and it provides context to give to your data points, really, so everyone knows what a data point means and what it is. And without that structure, I don't think AI can learn. I don't think it can scale, and I don't think it can deliver the results that you need to hold up to, really.
No, exactly. I can agree more. And just extend on that, when that foundation is in place, the impact shows up fast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we've seen cases, haven't we, where regulated submissions move through faster because supporting data is already validated and complete, or supplier qualification cycles drop by nearly half. I think we've seen that in some of the companies that we've quoted off so far. But what's good is governance, it looks like in practice, which is measurable and not just theoretical control. And that's great.
Yeah. With that said, I sometimes get the question, and I could believe you get that too sometimes. The question is, why can't we just add AI on top of what we already have me? What's your take on that, Ian?
Yeah, that's probably one of the most common questions we actually hear. And it's got a question to answer. And it's because AI doesn't fix bad data. It's not its job to do that. When you're trying to rely on it to do that, it actually multiplies it. It takes bad data and makes more bad data, and it circles and grows. So if the underlying data is fragmented or inconsistent, adding AI on top just accelerates those errors. And the classic garbage in, garbage out problem, we hear this so often when we talk about AI, it is underlined here. So regulators make this even more critical because now they expect every AI-driven decision to be explainable and not just what the model predicted, but they want the why. And if you can only really do that if your data is governed and if it's traceable and consistent across systems, the things that AI needs to be looking at to provide that. And we saw this clearly, just give a quick example, we saw this clearly with a medtech customer. And by governing over 9 million materials and component records through our platform, they improved the reporting actually by nearly 100%. Again, it's another 99.9. And they cut their migration costs by about 25 to 30%. And that foundation actually gave them the confidence to start extending AI into predictive monitoring and post-marketing safety. It's a simple truth. So governance doesn't slow AI down. It's what makes AI scalable, trustworthy, and compliant. And without it, you can build a pilot, but you'll never be able to certify it, audit it, or scale it across markets. Yeah.
I think that's a really crucial point you're making there. I think if the data isn't consistent, it's not traceable, you can't explain it, then it's a given that regulators won't accept it. And it should be a given as well that business leaders can't trust it. They might trust it, but they shouldn't. Yeah.
So it's actually, now that we're going down this torch, I actually have a bit of a surprise question, which we haven't really thought about yet, and I want to put you on a spot. So if life science leaders here want to start laying down this foundation, where do you think they should actually begin?
Yeah, I guess that's the golden nugget question here. I actually think Sebastian really set the scene earlier about with the numbers that he presented, right? Pharma's investing billions into GenAI or AI generally, but more than, what did you say, Sebastian? 60% of the pilots fail because the data foundation isn't ready.
60%,
Yeah. To me, this is where governance and MDM stop being an optional and becomes really something that a must. They're literally the prediction for being able to scale your AI. Without that single source of truth that you can rely on, explainability and regulatory compliance, it's nearly impossible. So the best way to start, I would say, is start small and start simple. It could be by running sort of a data health check or blueprint or whatever you want to call it, call it what you want. But it's really about identifying the critical domains that I talked about earlier, figuring out where is your critical data for your business. Is it product? Is it clinical? Is it supplier? What is it? And then align them under a governance framework. The goal with this is to really understand your current data maturity, how the data flow through your organization, where and when is it needed, to figure out where the quick wins are here. And from there, you can align your strategy with a more sort of tangible backlog that you have. And this is what makes AI investments a little bit more future-proof, I would say. We recently did something like this with another pharma company called Yesing, where we helped them create their data foundation blueprint to build from there. And as I said earlier, to me, governance is not a one-time fix. It's not something you run a project and then it's done. It's a cultural thing. It's an iterative process that you build on step by step over time. Just not to start big here either, smaller and build on it. What I'm essentially trying to say, I think, is that if you want AI to succeed, don't jump straight into the sexy algorithms, even though I understand that's something we want to do. But start with the less glamorous things, but the absolutely critical things, the foundation. And in this case, I'm trying to say that it's governance and MDM. And that's also why I really like that framing you talked about earlier, Sebastian, on the data validation AI agent. Yeah. I think that's my take on it.
Sebastian, you got any closing words for us here? Because I think we're close to the time up.
In the meantime, I have shared in a chat box, but it looks like the general conclusion is that without the data governance framework and master data management in place, any approach to implement generative AI-based solution is like scaling up the disaster in an exponentially growing pace. And what is funny in all of this tragedy is that at the beginning I mentioned that we are circling back around this topic for a few decades already, because exactly same issues, like we had exactly same issues and we heard about exactly same challenges when BI systems became more popular. Everyone wanted to have BI and beautiful data visualization, but the data wasn't there, basically. And now with generative AI, the impact is even bigger, consequences are bigger. But the good thing actually is that organizations can choose. Again, they have great opportunity window to choose if they want to see good results and good impact, or they are fine with what they have now. Yeah, it will be my conclusion.
As someone who's been working within the data space for almost 10 years, I'm super excited about AI coming in and helping make data more sexy, because it's been a little bit of an uphill battle for a long time. But I think from the conversations I am having, at least with data leaders out there and business leaders actually out there, is that they are now understanding that data is really, I think you used the word fuel earlier, Sebastian. It is the fuel to your business. I'm thinking we got a few minutes left, don't we?
Yeah, we have for questions, but I just want to refer to one part of what you said before. Yes, when you described the data governance framework, I really love that you have used the word definition. I think people, organizations are missing it so much. When we talk about the data, it sounds in a kind of the abstract way. But at the end of the day, it all starts with the definition. And it just came to my mind one case from my close environment when the organization tried to implement the CRM across the whole company, and ultimately they failed. And then it appeared that they haven't really had a definition of the objects. It's not really very complicated, and it's not. It just came to my mind. I wanted to share. And yeah, we have a space for a few questions to answer. I think
or comments, even if we're not that many people here, right? So is it possible for us to unmute people if anyone has input, thoughts, some experience they have done?
I will unmute everyone one by one.
Don't feel like you have to, but it would be nice to hear from you guys.
It's a great idea.
It feels like we've been preaching to the choir with each other for a long time now. So are we somewhat, do you agree with what we're saying, or what's your thoughts, feelings?
So your mic should be unmuted now. If you would like to say something, please just unmute yourself on your side, and then we could freely talk.
That was
Hi.
also one. Yeah,
I'm hearing.
nice.
Yes, I strongly agree that what Sebastian is mentioning, if you wanted to build any Gen AI based solution or AI based framework, definitely we should have a strong data governance framework, because data will be the key asset in this case. If we don't have the strong foundation, we cannot build any further on top of that.
True. Preaching to the choir.
Yeah, and based on your perspective, like, why do you think? Because David mentioned before that this is a mostly cultural issue, not really technological kind of issue. What is your take on this statement? Do you agree, or do you see some limits on the technological side?
Are you asking me or asking the audience?
No, I'm sorry. I was asking the audience, Linga. I agree with his perspective.
Yes.
I just wanted to.
Yes, definitely. I strongly agree with his statement as well, because we cannot build something magically in a night without having a strong legacy data. So if we are already good with your data, then you can do in any sort of solutions on top of it. Without having the strong data, clean data, it doesn't matter what sort of solution or technology you use. End of the day, it will be a big disaster, I would say, because it will not provide any valuable insights for the users with the wrong data or bad data.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point you're making there. It's you're placing a lot of trust in and I guess we can say that for anything. It doesn't have to only be AI. It could be Power BI. It can be a lot of systems out there that we're placing so much trust in, and we're investing so much money in implementing CRMs, ERPs, Power BI, what have you, a lot of different technologies. But as you're saying, if the data that we're feeding it with is not good or trustworthy, then the intelligent answers we'll get out of it is not that intelligent. No.
Yeah. It's kind of got me thinking in discussions that I've had, and also from working back in the industry, that when we talk about data, I think we've alluded, it's not a sexy topic or a sexy route to invest in moving data. It's essential. But also when we're looking at today's landscape of where, especially in life science and highly regulated industries, there's a lot of need for modernization, or a lot of desire for modernization. S/4HANA migrations, ERP is a prime example of that, all the way through to how can we now look at decentralizing models to be centralized moving forward. I think that we have a lot of side projects where AI is taken into a corner and it looks great, and then it scales and it fails. And people don't invest furthermore in the data because these other huge projects are taking a priority in the mindset of where things are going. But it's interesting because if these huge projects are to take off without hitch or without incidents, having your data foundation in line is probably one of the first things you want to do. Migrations, but you want to be staging your data, harmonizing it, deduplicating it before you start even talking about what's the strategy now to migrate, how many instances of this, where's that data going? And I think that's the challenge that we have in trying to push that how important that data foundation is, and having a strategy behind it. There's too much out there, especially again for life science, looking at evolving compliances. How are we going to deal with that tomorrow? It's changing up. AI and MDM can help with that, but it's a constant firefight in life science to what's coming next. How do I deal with it? Oh, we know data's a problem, we deal with that. And it's always, we know data's a problem, we deal with it. And it always seems to be something that goes up the list, never quite makes it to number one, but the other thing come on top and start pushing that priority down. And I think we talked about culture, and I think one of the things that is important is to turn around and say, sometimes you need to step back so you can see the wood for the trees and put data at the front. Because once your data's aligned, all the other things that you're firefighting, all the other new things are coming, so much easier to adopt, so much less friction, so much simpler to do.
And much more buy-in and value from the business side of things.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I have one comment to what you said, Damien, because you are using the phrase that data like bothers you, to be fair, that data is not sexy. Like in my opinion, data is extremely sexy. Like data is so great, so important, and you could do so much. This is the one thing that you can be really sure about if you do it in the right way. And then I started asking myself in my mind, so who really thinks that data is not sexy? And I'm not sure. I wanted to validate it with you, but I have a feeling that middle management, people that are ultimately going to use the tools, solutions, they are convinced. But I think what is happening right now is this transition when top management is learning that data is sexy, because it all fails on their level probably at some point, because teams, middle management was doing stuff, was cleaning the data, was presenting. It haven't been appreciated. So they stopped. Basically, like this is what I see, but I just wanted to ask you for your perspective. Have you had like any conversations around it? Any observations?
Yeah, very briefly, because I can see time wrapping up. Data champions are the champions, and they do find it sexy. From a business perspective, we try and empower them with as much information to take the stakeholders up above them. Those are going to be spending the budget, so on and so forth. I think when we're talking about data, it's making sure your champions advocate you and grit their teeth and push as hard as they can. Because if you try and go straight to around data governance, or just anything to do with data, unless it's a CDO, and even then you're struggling, because it's not so much as I really find that the champions find it sexy. You need to advocate them. Those that are parting with the money will have a larger scope in mind. They'll be interested, but they're still trying to firefight other things or trying to invest money in different directions. Yeah, agree with that. Data is sexy. I totally agree. So do many other people, but unfortunately, they're champions and not money holders. So there we go.
Yeah. Okay, guys, shall we conclude our beautiful meeting. Hello.
Yeah, someone left when you said that, so I take that as a very polite. Yeah, literally, as soon as that sentence came out, they went. It's okay. That's a yes then.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Sebastian, Damien, and thanks all of you for joining us today. We'll be sending a short summary of the webinar with the key takeaways by email.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for joining.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for having us.
Great.
Bye.
Have a perfect day.
Have
See
a
you.
good day.
Bye.
Bye.